Greetings, everyone.
Let's get dangerous.
This is so cool.
I know.
It feels so right.
It's Jake Ciely.
Opening our minds to new ideas. Kill him!
Who is that guy?
Your mama.
You just made the list.
Oh, wait, you're serious? Let me laugh even harder.
It's all in fantasy. Please of the range.
Sure, we talk about it all the time.
Really?
No. Burn.
Game on, you ducks. It is all in fantasy on FTN. I am Jake Ciely. And no, I do not have Chris Meany with me today. He is still enjoying his travels in New York for some reason because he's so special. But we love Chris. And I say we because we have somebody who's, I guess, like the original trio, so to speak. Joe Pisapia of Fantasy Pros and former podcasting life where we've won an award. Although I don't think my head was on top of the award in the picture that you still have somewhere.
It was.
We don't even, does anybody have the award on hand? That's my question.
I believe I don't have it. You don't have it. I know where it is. And I believe we're gonna have to do like an Ocean's 11 type heist film in order to get it.
To be able to get it.
Like, I think next year we coordinate something where we go in and we get it when you come in for flex weekend. I think it's very possible. I think we could do it. I know enough people on the inside where we can make it work. We just need an acrobat and Matt Damon. I think we can pull it off.
We just need somebody to stand out there and go, Matt Damon.
Matt Damon. Yeah. And everybody goes, oh my God, it's Matt Damon. And it creates the distraction and everyone goes to get an autograph. And then we go ahead and then we steal the trophy.
That's actually smart. I think that is. Why Joe's also here is because this past weekend we kicked off draft season for fantasy football. We kicked off draft season, as we always do, live in New York. The Flex Leagues, now in the, did you know, Joe, the 12th year, 11th live.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. I was shocked myself.
Think of how many years I've been doing it. It's at least 6.
Almost, I was going to say more than that. I feel like it's been more like 8.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think I'm an original. I'm not an original.
Not
but I'm definitely
OG. Not hanging out at the Hibernia.
Is there somebody besides you that has been a day one original? Like,
there is one person. Do you want to guess who it is?
Oh, who would be the one OG? Rick Wolf.
No, Rick Wolf was. That's the dogs are going crazy. You can hear barking back.
There's the wolves.
Hey.
Ciely releases the hounds.
I know. No, it's Dennis Esser, Coach Esser.
Oh, that's even more like bizarre of like a weird like turnaround of names in that. I was going with one of the OGs, thinking, okay, it's an OG in fantasy. Rick was always around, but well, okay, there you go. That's funny.
Coach Esser, yeah, it helps that he's living in New York, and so a good friend of Nando DeFino's, so that's a big part. Actually, no, there's
he and I
guess, are you saying OG from the first year or OG from the first year live? These two are starting to. Hey,
OG from the first year. I thought I was coming on here to work with a professional, and this is a reminder of why I don't work with you every day. You got dogs running around, all these
OG
things.
In the first year, OG first live since first live. That's what
OG first draft is what I was talking about. Like,
so even online, because the very first year was online only, and then the second year was live. So I was going to say Jamie Eisenberg is actually OG. He's the one who actually, and Dave Ganos, those two helped me start it. It was actually, for everybody out there, real quick, we're going to actually help you with your drafts. That's the entire point of the show.
The history of Jake Ciely's Flex Draft, ladies and gentlemen. It's a 4-part documentary series.
I want to give Jamie credit because he never wants to take credit for it. I was doing an article. You remember football.com? Do you remember when I briefly wrote for that and ran football.com's fantasy side? Well, I was the lead editor over there. Football.com, way to throw away that URL, everybody. So I was doing that there, and
put it in right now.
Back then, to show that I have ideas before anybody else has ideas, I was doing the top 100 broken out into groups of 20, not groups of 10 like NFL does now with their players. Before that even happened, I was doing that for the fantasy industry. Before Fantasy Pros, your boys, were even doing what they did, the consensus ranks. I was doing that. I was like, hey, let me get all these people together. I'll do the math and average them all together. And then I sent the ranks back out to everybody in groups of 20. And I said, who's too high, who's too low, who's just right. And at the end of it, Jamie was like, you know what? You have a good collection of people here. We should do a fantasy league together. And I was like, I've been trying to make this happen just like Tout Wars for years. And boom, there you go. The start, the origination of Flex.
Well, I love Flex. I'm a big fan. It's difficult because
you love the Flex.
I do. Oh, good swole. No, but the flex drafts challenge is that it happens before training camp. So yeah, now you're just sitting on your team for the next 4 weeks, waiting, hoping that nobody gets hurt, and you're not losing any major players before the season. Because a couple years ago, I lost Travis Etienne, which sucked. I remember that one. And then last year, I lost Nick Chubb in week 1. So that was like pretty much the same thing. The same gut punch kind of feeling. Like you're really excited. This has all gone well. But you know what I did? And I was talking to Andrew Erickson. You know, he was at the draft with us. And Andrew, you know, came over for the weekend, stayed at my house, and we hung out. We all went to the draft together. And I look back at last year's draft, and even though I liked the draft, especially in the beginning, and of course injuries happen to everybody, what I tried to do is say, where did I go wrong? And I don't, even as experts, even as, you know, casual players, I don't think there's enough of that where you're like, you know, you look and say, what were the decisions I made that were bad? Did I go in too early in the tight end run? And the answer is yes. And this year I avoided it. Because last year I realized, well, I could get somebody later, and guess what? I got somebody later, and that same person I got last year, I got this year late. So I keep looking at it and saying, you know, there's never a stop of the improvement, no matter who you are or how good you think you are at fantasy football. Everybody can learn from certain mistakes. And look, I still, you know, figured it out. Still a very competitive team. I did not defend my championship last year, unfortunately. Went back to Ronis, but we have passed that along because it was me, then it was Ronis, then it was me and Ronis. And it was just Ronis last year. So we've been moving that bad boy around for a couple of years. So it needs to come back home to me. That's what I say.
Well, I mean, Ronis is calling himself the 2-time defending champion. So I think it's.
When I called I was like, I heard you talking trash, bro. I heard you talking champion as if somehow I don't have the other piece of that belt, bro. Like,
that's what I said. 1.5 is still impressive. And
well, he said I'm still the champ. I said I know that, but you know. It's a little
well. Then he threw out the so for everybody that doesn't know, but they'll remember what happened. This was Joe and Ronis were headed into the final game with players left to play, and that Bills Bengals, and he kept saying, "It's like, well, Jamar Chase was going to score more than 8." I was like, "That's not like Joe didn't have anybody," and like, and also. Like Aaron Rodgers, I mean, we saw that. What happens if Chase 4 snaps and he hurt his ankle? Like, I mean, there's things. I think what we did was the funnest way to do it because they actually shout out to Trophy Smack actually chopped the chain in half and you both have a half. So like, cool. If there's 30 years down the road and you guys don't have your memory anymore and you like find yourself in some random place and you like put it together and you reunite and you're like, I remember you, and you can put it together like long lost brothers or something.
It is so heavy. Like I can't.
No, their chains are like ridiculous.
Weighed like 40 pounds. And
how does the chain weigh more than the belt?
Chain weighed more than the belt, and
I'm not even talking about the necklace part. Just like
it's brutal, dude. Absolutely brutal.
But you have one, and we are going to talk about your possible defending of it. You are in the Superflex. We're also going to talk about the one quarterback too. Some of you on the outside looking at the one quarterback. But right off the top, my biggest question to you is like, so I reference you a lot. When like every single year is like, I don't want to take credit. Whatever people come up with, like I always give credit and then talk about why I like it if it's something that I like. And one thing is VBD that you talk about all the time. And it's the value situation. And I always say, like, if you draft Lamar Jackson Superflex, don't wait forever to take your second quarterback because you threw that value away. I don't think your intent was to do that because you preach that a lot. But your draft... Explain what happened. So for everybody out there, you can go check out the draft board. We'll tweet it out. Lamar Jackson at 1.5 makes a lot of sense. I would actually take him as the third quarterback off the board, whether you want to take Mahomes or whatever.
We're in agreement on that.
I don't get that. But in Lamar Jackson, you come back with Marvin Harrison, not even that pick or whatever. But then what happened is kind of the board fell. I'll let you explain it. Basically, you didn't take another quarterback until Justin Fields in the 9th round. And I was like, wow, that is not the Joe Pisapia I know.
Well, it was a very calculated risk. See, this room is very different because these rooms, you throw ADP out the window. It has nothing to do with ADP. It has nothing to do with any of that. And it became a situation of, do I continue to chase these guys that are kind of all the same there? You know, like Baker Mayfield was the watermark for me. And the round that I decided to let Baker Mayfield go in that round, I ended up selecting T. Higgins.
Which I love.
Is my third wide receiver. Like T. Higgins is my third wide receiver in a super flex of experts. Is a value I could not pass up because that's another 1A guy. And that was basically the decision is, do I want to have the Baker Mayfield again? And like, that's the kind of guy where it's like, well, he's probably going to finish somewhere around like that fringy QB1 area like he did last year, most likely. He was very underrated last year in terms of statistics, what he put up. The one concern is that offensive coordinator that left. You know, when Canales goes, you saw what happened when he left with Geno and things fell apart. Does that same thing happen in Tampa? I don't know. It's not impossible that it does. Sometimes there's just certain quarterback whispers where things go well and then things fall apart. But what I did was I said, well, how can I win this league? And the way I can win this league is taking the guy on the board at quarterback who has the most upside, the guy who 2 years ago was QB, 8 or 7, I believe, overall in Justin Fields, who didn't even play that entire season, had missed some time for injury, and he was still QB 7, right? A guy who rushed for 1,000 yards at quarterback in a half PPR league. So Fields was always my intention. And I told Andrew, I was like, Fields is going to go early in the draft. He just didn't know I was talking about me. So, and then what I did 2 rounds later was back it up immediately with somebody who I know is already a setup, fringy, boring, QB 16 overall, and Derek Carr. Derek Carr
are they really going to turn to Rattler? And if so, at that point,
of course they're not going to turn.
Put it this way: if they turn to Rattler in like week 14 and that ruins your team of Derek, then you weren't in the mix anyway. So
100%. So what I've done here is I have Derek Carr at least starting out of the gate if Fields doesn't get the job. I keep coming back to the same situation is like the more you start to use that football knowledge and acumen in your decision-making process, and I have the relative position value stuff that you're talking about in terms of RPV and the Black Book, but I also have something new this year. I don't know if you've seen it called the
I said VBD, sorry, RPV. I want to make sure that's clear. Yeah, I know that's relative because it's different.
Copyright infringement.
No, because value-based drafting, I was going to say, value-based drafting is VBD. Our relative position value was what I was honing in on. It's completely, value-based drafting is just like what's the best value on the board for position, blah, blah, blah.
That's not what this
RPV,
is. This is the best guy.
Real quick, as we sidebar, explain that, because I always explain it, but I don't go as in depth for you. But it ties into the whole, if you take Lamar Jackson, if you take Marvin Harrison, and then you don't draft another wide receiver for 6 rounds, what the hell were you doing? Explain RPV for everybody.
Well, everybody has an RB1 in their team theoretically, but again, how do you create an advantage, right? So a lot of value-based drafting, they'll just do it as a position as a whole. What I do in the Black Book is I compare the top 12 RBs to each other. The next 12. Same thing with wide receivers, right? You're going through there. So you're seeing where the margins are, who is positive, who is better than fantasy league average, not as a wide receiver, because that's useless, as a fantasy league average wide receiver 1. That's what you want to see. And that's how you create. And if you have 2 number 1 wide receivers, guess what? That second guy is an advantage over the next group of 12 that most people are going to have a wide receiver, quote unquote, 2 on their team. So it's learning how to use that system in order to create scoring on a weekly basis. It's going to outperform the other folks in your league. Every time you can be above that fantasy league average at a position in your roster, you're going to be more successful overall. It's just the hard math of it, as long as, again, everyone stays healthy. But this year, what I'm doing is the ecosystem on top of that, which is grading teams based upon coaching, quarterback play, skill positions, offensive line, and continuity. And really looking, we always talk about, well, you should draft good players on good teams because then they'll score more points. It sounds really simple, right? But trying to figure that out and also see where the potential outliers might be coming into the season, like the Cardinals, I think, are an outlier in terms of offense this year. That is, I think, that next step. And this goes to the Fields pick, which is I was going to make sure that I pounded the table hard at wide receiver, that I had a backup, an RB2 that was a little bit more solid than I had last year, because losing Chubb in week 1 really was just me scrambling the rest of the year. I didn't back it up soon enough. That hero RB just didn't work for me last year because this is such a competitive league. So I had Rashard White. So that caused me to miss Matthew Stafford. I was willing to do that because Stafford is old, risky. And you know what? I can take Derek Carr, who at the end of the day is probably going to be pretty close in scoring points to Matthew Stafford. Let's not pretend like it's not going to be the case. It's probably going to be. And Justin Fields, I do believe, is going to be the guy in Pittsburgh who ends up winning that job or being the guy, because why are we looking at a 30-something quarterback and Russell Wilson on a 1-year deal when we could be looking at the future franchise quarterback in Justin Fields? There's no way anybody with a head that's working properly can look at that situation and not think that Fields is the project, and Wilson's there to not put pressure on Fields. But if Fields emerges in practices in preseason as by far the better option, there's no way Mike Tomlin isn't going to play him. And I think that was part of that pick and part of that reasoning. And if it works, I've got not 1, but 2 quarterbacks that can rush for 1,000 yards. That's not something anybody in the league can really talk about.
So, and I'm glad you brought that up, because this ties into what was originally going to be the first question, is your strategy. Now, you're mostly, a lot of time, I think since we did it, you've been in Superflex. I've bounced around depending on where the openings are, because I just try to make leagues balance. Right. Excuse me. But when it comes to Superflex, I'm doing charity one right now with Shane Barrett and my first two quarterbacks. I don't even care that they're both on week 14. I actually went Lamar, Jaden Daniels, because I'm like, 100%. Who cares? Sure. I have the RB1 in my quarterbacks because I have 2,000 rushing yards. But when it comes to like strategy in Superflex, obviously, quarterbacks, for everybody listening, quarterbacks go earlier. But do you generally just not this specific draft, not flex for itself, but in general, are you the type of person that you try to go for more of this risk upside that you ended up with? Or are you somebody like, hey, I want to get 2 in the top 14 anytime I can? Or like, do I need to get Lamar and another fringe top 10? Or are you like, I'd rather do, like, what's the ideal Joe Pisapia Superflex strategy? Is, you know what I'm saying? Like, what would make Joe Pisapia be like, man, I love my quarterback start, because like Meany's on the side where like he really wants to hit that Brock Purdy, Jordan Love, Dak Prescott kind of range where he didn't have to take one in the first, maybe even 2 rounds, but he gets 2 right there at that fringe QB1. I'm more the type of person that I want a really top end one, and then I want a second one before we even get to like the bottom half of the QB2s. Typically,
I'd like to get the second one to get to the end. But in this room, I knew there was going to be a couple things. Number one, I was drafting in the middle, so I'm kind of at the whim of both of those turns. So you're not always in a good spot where you can control the board. I think it's much easier to do that at the turn. It's much easier to do that at the beginning of the draft. Because even if let's say you were at top 3, you could even look, Funston took McCaffrey at 3 overall, could have easily taken Daniels and then Prescott when he took Prescott, or, another quarterback like Brock Purdy right after, or Jordan Love. That's a great start to a team, right? Theory, because you got 2 QB1s and a stalwart big time skill player. But for me being in the middle, it's much harder. Now, I also know that the guy next to me is Adam Ronis, and the guy on the other side of me is, and he and I are going to have the same board and the same ideas because we draft exactly the same every year. And then the guy next to me, I know Jeff Ratcliffe's strategy, which is he is going to wait and he's going to take 2, fringy QB1 guys, like whatever his board is. That's always his strategy. So knowing that, I was able to kind of foster what I wanted. But in this board in the middle, again, I took Lamar. When it came back to me, I took my number 1 wide receiver, Marvin Harrison, who I love. Derrick Henry made it back to me, which is exactly what I wanted. It was very hard for me to pass on Jahmyr Gibbs, but the only reason I did was because I said, look, if I don't take Harrison, I'm going to miss out on those big wide receiver ones. And then if Derrick Henry makes it back to me, that's the win. And it did. Especially, again, you have to realize it's half PPR. So that control of the offense is really interesting. I don't know if you realize this, but myself, Adam Ronis, Erickson all did the same thing, which is we kind of control the offenses of a few teams. I get all the points for the Ravens because I've got Lamar and I've got Derrick Henry. All points filter through my team for the Baltimore Ravens. If Lamar's throwing a touchdown, rushing a touchdown, or handing it to Derrick Henry for a touchdown. You've got Ronis, who's got Isaiah Pacheco and Mahomes. You've got Erickson, who's got Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson. That strategy is part of that ecosystem thing that I talk about. It's like if you get in on a good team that has a good offensive ecosystem with a good coach, good situation, good quarterback play, all those things come together in a nice confluence of events. That's a pretty good way to build your team. And if one of those teams happens to have a so-so defense, that's even better because there's going to be more shootouts, potentially higher platforms of scoring. But I just pounded wide receiver with Harrison, Pittman, Terry McLaurin, T. Higgins, Christian Watson. If I end up having to roll the dice with Justin Fields, but that's my wide receiver room when I have basically 5 guys that could be the number 1s or 1As on their team, that's a pretty good situation for me.
I definitely agree, and I was really ticked off I didn't get Derrick Henry. This is a show that loves some Derrick Henry between me and myself. There's no question about it. We've hammered that. People don't need to hear more about Derrick Henry is basically what I'm saying. I want to go to your second pick. So you started Lamar Jackson. You came back around Marvin Harrison. This is actually like a double. I know you're not supposed to do this, but I'm going to shotgun you a question because there's 2 right here because a lot of times people forget the second one. But Joe Pisapia is a pro, and I know he'll answer both questions here. Is one, Ronis said something to me after the draft, and he said, if I knew Jaden Daniels would be there in the second, I wouldn't have went Mahomes. Would you say the same thing about Lamar, knowing that Daniels was there? And then two, Marvin Harrison in front of Garrett Wilson, Nakua, London, Olave. I'm with you. But, of course, there's the concern of, like, he's a rookie, and, like, what is it? So the first question, again, would you have changed your strategy looking back, hindsight 2020, knowing Daniels was there? And then 2, any possible concern of Marvin Harrison not being a wide receiver 1 as a rookie?
Well, first of all, I can tell you the Jaden Daniels thing was very tempting. Him making it back to me didn't give me pause of that. Because I think in this league, Lamar's MVP twice now. Like, when do we start giving this guy a little bit more credit? I don't understand. It hurts my brain.
Did you see he's not even top 3 for MVP in Vegas right now? Like, I don't get it.
I don't understand it at all. But I think that, if you look at just in a league like this where everybody's so good, yeah, Jaden Daniels is super sexy, and I took him in my, dynasty drafts this year, in my rookie drafts everywhere I could get him. I understand that maybe there's a little bit of, FOMO of that situation, but you can't guarantee that's going to be the case, especially considering last year quarterbacks went crazy in this draft. It was bizarre. Who were the two guys playing quarterback chicken at the end?
That's the same thing Ronis
and Adam Ronis. And, and that's the thing. Like, we were playing quarterback chicken, and I was at 2 and he was at 12. So I'd look down the row at him and I was like, all right, is it your turn? You going to do it? Nope. All right. Well, it's going to come back to me and I'm not going to do it either. We kept doing it. And I don't remember who his second quarterback ended up being Jordan Love. And my second quarterback ended up being CJ Stroud last year. So we did okay when we played chicken last year. So I think it's okay. I would not have changed anything about that because Harrison's a guy that I really wanted. And I wanted Harrison over Puka. And I wanted him over Garrett Wilson for a few reasons. The first one is, you can take that rookie thing and throw it out the window. I mean, did Justin Jefferson not have 1,400 yards as a rookie last time I checked, right? Did Jamar Chase not come in the league and just blow the doors off? These rookie wide receivers who are coming in are just blowing the doors off the league. Marvin Harrison is that kind of talent. He is polished. He's a great route runner, great hands. He checks every single box. I'm not worried about him. The defense stinks. They're going to be in a lot of good potential spots. Just a couple years ago, Kyler Murray supported DeAndre Hopkins with a 1,400-yard season. So I am confident in the age of the quarterback. I have confidence in he is by far the alpha dog in that offense. Trey McBride is great. But Marvin Harrison is the guy getting fed 10, 12 targets a game. Period. End of story. That's how you win football games if you're Arizona. Garrett Wilson does have this weird Aaron Rodgers thing going on. And no matter what, I don't know if I can't just shake it. It's like the idea of the Jets and what the Jets are. I love the player of Garrett Wilson. He's an extraordinary talent. But I'm thinking about upside. I'm thinking about winning leagues. And I could see a world where Garrett Wilson has a great season with 8 touchdowns and 1,200 yards, but I can absolutely see one where Marvin Harrison blows past that because that Jet defense is so good. Maybe a little bit more conservative, maybe a little bit more run first because the age of Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers was a quarterback in decline before he got hurt. Go back and look at the last year in Green Bay. The stats all bear it out. I write the quarterback profiles for Black Book every year. Please, every single time. I'm like, did we forget that he was kind of in decline before this anyway? And then the Puka one is interesting because I love Puka, but then you have this whole like Puka injury history in college. You have a couple moments where it crept up last year. You have Cooper Kupp still looming around there. And I don't know if I want to believe the reports, Jake, that all of a sudden he is, now the number 1 again and all this stuff. Like maybe that's true. It's possible.
Hey, but best shape of his life.
The only downside with Marvin Harrison is he's a rookie. He ain't a rookie. He's Marvin Harrison Jr. Okay. Like this guy knows exactly what the NFL is. It's not a learning curve for him, in my opinion. So if the only knock on him is he's new, that's not enough of a knock for him to be after those guys.
I completely agree. As we said, Marvin Harrison is. I have Marvin Harrison inside my top 10 for wide receivers. I love that. In addition to the fact that, but also you forgot to mention, Jamar Chase was dropping all those passes in the preseason. Joe, remember?
Yeah, I remember that. That was great.
He's dropping all those passes.
What did he do his rookie season? I'm trying to remember.
I thought it was pretty good. I don't remember. And now he's playing with Eminem, so look out. Like it's going to be big time now.
Yeah,
did you see the picture where they put Joe Burrow next to
1455. That was the number.
1450. You were looking up. Did you see Joe Burrow next to Gunther from Friends? Like the
no, I didn't see that comparison, but the Eminem one is obviously. I did see the one where they put that hair on all the other quarterbacks, like Mahomes and Josh Allen. Allen actually pulled it off.
I see that.
Yeah,
I didn't see that.
Yeah,
I see if we could pull that off. Oh, but real quick, so everybody knows if you like Survivor too, which we do, the biggest pro football contests are back in Vegas this time. Circus Survivor and Circa Millions are now up to a record 16 million in guaranteed prizes. 2 ways to win, no rake. Circus Survivor contestants select one team each week with no point spread. It's Survivor. Last the longest to win it all, 10 million guaranteed. That's a pretty big pool for a Survivor that I'll probably be in. With Circa Millions, make 5 picks against the spread each week for your share of $6 million guaranteed through quarterly and full season payouts. Enter in Nevada or play from anywhere. Visit circusports.com for details. Joe Pisapia last year, I made it the furthest. I made it to week 14. I was on a roll.
Wow.
Week 14, and 5 idiots somehow were still going. I'm like, how? What the hell is happening? Here's the best story about it, though, Joe, on the side. If I asked this to Meany. Now, this pool of people was well over 400. Even if you did like $10, that's a pretty significant pool. It was a little bit more than 10, not much more. I just don't want to be like, oh, look, whatever. I'm just throwing this out because I asked Meany the same question. If you got down to 5 people in week 15, would you split knowing you're going to get that? And then what was the same thing Meany said is the same thing I would say is like leave 10% over for the actual winner, like split.
Oh, that's good. I like that.
And then extra. Or would you go for it all or nothing and keep riding? Which would you choose?
No, I like the split and the extra. I'm not a greedy guy. Like I'm
Neither am I. And you know what happened? Here's the best case. What happened? The 5 people, 4 of them wanted to split. The one that didn't, I crap you not,
he went
lost that next week. And the other 4 advanced. And then the other 4 split it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand that. Money in the hand, baby. Money in the hand. I'm the king of like putting the bets down on these numbers, and then like when they start to shrink, and I get cash outs. Yeah, I'll cash out of it. It's funny because I had a lot of shares for the 49ers to go to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl, and I cashed out of them all after they won because I didn't like how they looked in the playoffs. So I already won a ton of money. It was way up, but then they were offering me cash outs, right? Because they got all the way to the end, and I had 49ers to go into NFC. 49ers to go to the Super Bowl, 49ers to win the Super Bowl, I had it all. And I, once again, came down to it all depends on who was on the other side. And once I knew Andy Reid was on the other side, and I knew Kyle Shanahan would try to be too fancy and not just run the football and do what he has to do to win a football game and grind it out. He wants to prove he's the smartest guy in the room. Look at all my fancy play calling. I took all of that money, literally all of the winnings. I think 80% of it, rolled it over to the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl and Mahomes winning MVP. And it was a good week. It was a good week. It was fun.
Sounds like you need to do a vacation. Sounds like you need
well, I actually did go on vacation.
Okay, well there you go.
But that's the thing. I mean, literally thousands of dollars. Why? Because you go back to the same idea of what are your eyes telling you? And that goes back to the Fields conversation. I'm watching Fields. I know the talent that Fields is. I remember watching with Ohio State. The Bears situation was a complete cluster, which is why I'm still one of these people that is a little edgy about Caleb Williams. I'm just edgy about it. I'm not saying he can't be good, but it's a tough situation, a tough media market, a tough weather market, and the guy kind of struggled in the second half last
I'll give you a comparison.
It's a lot.
I'll give you a comparison. So Justin Fields, what do we know coming out of college? Justin Fields, same thing we're seeing in the NFL. Not the best deep ball, makes some poor decisions that he shouldn't. We've also seen Justin Fields win games. We've seen Justin Fields make some terrific throws. We've seen Justin Fields, but he was never going to be somebody who was like, 4,000 passing yards and 35 touchdowns. That's not who Justin Fields is. And we've had different coaches. We've had messy offenses, messy offensive lines, and all these situations where, like, if you can get some consistency for him, like maybe you can develop into a game around him. I'm setting that up to say this. On the flip side, we're going into the 4th year and saying, pause, he still could be the generational talent because he had to deal with Urban Meyer. He had to deal with this. He had to deal with that. Why does Trevor Lawrence get 18 passes? Why is Sam Darnold getting his 75th chance in the NFL? And Justin Fields and Bryce Young, by the way, I don't know if you know this, Bryce Young's career is already over. Like, it doesn't matter they brought in Deontay Johnson. It doesn't matter that he's done. His career's over. But people want to bury Justin Fields. And I'm not saying he's going to work out. I'm not saying Justin Fields
Why
the
did
password.
Lamar Jackson slip in the first round of the draft?
Well, of course.
The minute he slipped past Bill Belichick, I was sitting there that day and I remember screaming at my television, oh my God, he's going to do it again. He's going to be ahead of everybody else. He's going to take Lamar Jackson, even though he doesn't have to, and they were going to be ahead. And then they took Sony Michel. And I'll never forget that moment. I said, that's it. Bill is done. The game has passed him by. Because he was always the guy that was ahead of the curve. And when he didn't take Lamar, imagine, and for whatever the reasons, I get it. Everyone has their different evaluation systems in terms of what they want out of a quarterback and their systems and all of that. But you're 100% right. Why some of these guys get the second, third, fourth, fifth chance, and some other guys who are still young. Look, Lawrence was also very young when he came in the league. I think that's one of those things too you have to put into that equation. But you're right. This is kind of a make or break season for Trevor Lawrence. I feel like he has to sort of start to cash in on some of that upside. Otherwise, it's going to be one of those big misses where people said, you know what? The evaluation really wasn't as good. Maybe Clemson was just a great place for a very good quarterback prospect, and he wasn't generational necessarily.
Yeah, I think Trevor Lawrence doesn't look comfortable still in the NFL. He's making throws that he never made, like stupid throws that he never made in college. But that was a complete sidebar. I do want to talk about 2 more players and then get your thoughts on some of the one quarterback for everybody out there, just as a strategy overall, since we hit Superflex, but now hone in on some of these players. I do love the value of Brian Robinson that you got in the 10th round. Now, for everybody out there, again, this is Superflex, so Brian Robinson fell probably about 2 more rounds than he normally would have. I thought, as a complete sidebar to this draft, I thought it was interesting. In past years, you brought that up. Like, look at, especially if you know your league. Like, look at your league. Look at what you did. I always look at my last year's draft and be like, oh, what were people thinking? How much did they fall into the preseason hype? That type of stuff. But in past years, flex leagues, super flex leagues, I looked at it and said, you know who usually falls? The wide receivers. This year, the running backs fell. Normally, the wide receivers, just in general in Superflex, are the ones that fall because there's more of them. And then people are like, well, if I'm going to get the crunch somewhere, let me make sure I get the running backs with my quarterbacks because there's going to be wide receivers. It was the opposite this year. Running backs really kind of fell. Brian Robinson in 10th. There's a big conversation here because we know Austin Eckler, everything that could have gone wrong went wrong for him last year. Do you think Brian Robinson, as of today, if you had to pick one off the board, because we just had this conversation with Meany last week, if you had to just only take Brian Robinson or Austin Eckler, who would you take? Because I think Brian Robinson is a little underrated as a pass catcher, and I feel like Austin Eckler at this point of his career, much better than him, but I think he could fall into that Antonio Gibson type role with the Commanders.
In this half PPR, it was no question I was taking Robinson over Eckler, and I did. But I would take Robinson too because I'm just taking the younger running back. Again, sometimes you just want to keep it simple. And I like Dan Quinn as a football coach. I think this is going to be he's one of those guys where, you know, you see a lot of coaches in the league who get that second chance. Sometimes they really roll with it and become really good. I think Dan Quinn's going to be one of those guys. I really do. He's a good football guy. He's been around a long time. I think he got, you know, some difficult situations to deal with in the past, but I think that, Robinson to me is that guy because the age of Eckler, the wear and tear of Eckler. And, you know, whenever a running back gets jettisoned to another team, and there's so much of that this year, right? You got Mixon on the team. You got, like, I'm trying to, like, there's a bunch of them. They're just like, oh,
Jacobs, Aaron Jones.
I mean, Derrick Henry is kind of the anomaly to me because, again, he went to the best possible place he could. It was more like get out of jail than we don't want you. It was more like let Derrick Henry go be good because we're not going to be good for a while and let's figure out what we're going to be. But those other situations typically tend to not work out. The Jacobs one, the Mixon one, like all those guys, that's the running back group that I'm kind of staying away from. But the Brian Robinson, as you mentioned, getting him in the, what was it, the 10th round, I got him in. And then
same round as Tony Pollard and Chase Brown.
But then Rico Dowdle in the 13th is another guy that I took. Why? Because he's just the younger running back. And I'm just not sold that everything goes back to, you know, 3 years ago or 2 years ago when Ezekiel Elliott is the guy, quote unquote. If he was so good, they wouldn't have let him go in the first place. It's fun to bring him back. All that's a good story, but I don't care about good stories. I want running backs that are younger, healthier, and in good situations where the need is there. And then I took Eli Mitchell too. I think looking back at this draft this year, I did a much better job of also giving myself some running back depth at the end, which I did not have enough of last year in my roster, in my opinion. And it hurt me at times because, again, once you have that injury to Chubb at the top, if he's your hero RB, everybody's got to be next man up. And if you don't have enough depth to do that, it can get really tricky. But I'm also banking on, you know, Christian McCaffrey's 400 plus touches. I've never seen a guy come back the next year and be great. And everyone just seems to want to ignore that fact. We'll see. We'll see if it makes an issue for him or doesn't make an issue. Maybe he's just this guy that, you know, is unflappable. But having Elijah Mitchell too, if something's happened to McCaffrey, all of a sudden that becomes an extremely valuable guy that could be an RB2 or even a flex there too on certain weeks.
Yep. So one more specifically that you took. Wait, did you take him? I thought you took him. He is not on your team. Then I'm just going to ask you about him in general. I don't know. I'm just going to. Yeah, that's
I'll
okay.
talk about him anyway.
Yeah, you will. Of course you will, because you're Joe Pisapia and you can handle that. You actually didn't take another wide receiver after Christian Watson, but that's okay because Christian Watson's your 5th, by the way. T. Higgins.
My 5th. I mean, I've got McLaurin, I've got Higgins, I got Pittman, I got Harrison. I mean, and then I got Mooney and McMillan at the end, so that's okay.
That's what I was looking for. Oh, the board. That's the board shrunk on me. I knew you. So that's why, because I did have Darnell Mooney here. So
Yeah, Mooney
Darnell
McMillan.
Mooney. Here's my argument for Mooney. Like, I don't think Darnell Mooney's top 25. I don't even think he's a consistent wide receiver 3. But everybody's sitting here and going, Drake London top 10, which I'm not part of that group. Drake London top 16? Sure, absolutely. Drake London top 10. Now what do I say, Joe? You're buying all the risk. You've bought all of it. He has to be almost Justin Jefferson with Kirk Cousins. But my point is not that. My point is, if Kirk Cousins is going to make Drake London top 10, if Kirk Cousins is going to make Kyle Pitts the top 5 tight end that we had hoped that we were going to get after his rookie season of 1,000 yards, if he's going to do that, if he's going to be Kirk Cousins, somebody else exists.
I know.
Why are people not on Darnell Mooney as a flyer? Because Jordan Addison, even KJ Osborne, there's somebody else that exists with Kirk Cousins.
There is. And look, I think Mooney is okay. I'm with you. I'm not saying he's a wide receiver 3.
Mooney has a wide receiver 3 finish with the Bears.
He does, but I agree. The circumstances mean that Darnell Mooney is a guy that in the right matchup on bye weeks, I can throw in there and not feel like, oh my God,
wide receiver 4.
And McMillan is a guy that's clearly carving out the 3rd wide receiver spot in Tampa. And considering the age of Mike Evans and the injury history of Chris Godwin, there's room for more. And I think with those last 2 picks, you mentioned the word flyer. That's exactly what you're doing. You're taking flyers with upside. Josh Downs is the guy that I wanted. He went earlier than I thought he was going to, which of course went to Derek Brown. So it should not have been surprising to me that happened. But that was the guy that I was saying, okay, I can kind of scoop him up in these last couple rounds, but that wasn't going to happen. But yeah, I'm with you 100% there. Mooney, McMillan, I think far too often people will, at the end of drafts, they'll just take recognizable names or names that they, it's like, well, this is the 3rd running back on whatever. Like, don't do that. Look at situations in the offensive ecosystems, like I read about in the Black Book, again, where there could be yield of fantasy points. And
do you remember what I used to call this?
McMillan is. What's that?
The Greg Jennings rule. Don't draft a wide receiver 5. And I'm obviously not talking about peak Greg Jennings. I even said this on the Sirius XM show Saturday. Also, who has still the best highlight of Madden video game of all time because he pulled his hammy and ran for that touchdown that everybody's seen now at this point. That is going to go into the Hall of Fame of Madden highlights. But that being said, Randall Cobb. Well, I don't know why I pick on Packers wide receivers, but like
you just hate the Packers here.
Cole Beasley not in those peak seasons. Like, I don't want wide receiver 5. I don't want the 50th best anything. I don't want the 40th best running back. I want somebody who could potentially break out, or you know what? I drop and look for another one. I don't want a guy that's going to be on waivers all the time. So the last thing we're going to talk about over in the 1 quarterback, Joe, and I know you're going to love this because you get to look at my team, and then we will talk the rest of the draft, but you can look at my team and be like, this is why you're stupid, Jake. So this is because I'm gonna
for this all my life.
I know. So I'm going to present my side of the case because you look at my team and I'm kind of like, oof, this is. But this is what happened. I drafted out of the 4th spot. First of all, CeeDee Lamb fell to me, and I was like, holy crap, this is an amazing start. And then I took Pacheco in the back because I was like, I wanted to get my RB1, and then I was like, Adams. 170 targets, I don't know if it's happening. Waddle, Nico Collins, I'm already dipping to that tier where it's like, hey, there's a whole bunch of guys in that tier, which is T. Higgins in the 4th. I consider in that same tier. I think T. Higgins is top 20. But I'm saying this to say, Pacheco, Mixon, Higgins. So CeeDee Lamb, Higgins, Pacheco, Mixon, that's my 4 to start. I'm feeling good at this point. 5th round, Kamara's still there. And this is where I go to your RPV. I'm like, what gives me more of an advantage? Kamara as my 3rd running back versus everybody else's 3rd running back, or Stephon Diggs, Zay Flowers, Keenan Allen, Calvin Ridley as my wide receiver 3, which everybody's going to have. But here's the problem I ran into. Lamar was still there in the 6th, and I'm like, I cannot pass on Lamar in the 6th. Industry league, this is not going to happen in your home league. But this is really where the rub started to happen. Nick Chubb's still sitting there in the 7th. I already have 3 running backs. I have 2 wide receivers still only at this point. Now, similar to your situation with your quarterback, the wide receivers at this point, now, granted, we are in a completely different tier at this point at wide receiver. But the wide receivers are Brian Thomas, Christian Watson, Jordan Addison, Jameson Williams, who I actually did think about. And again, I had the conversation in my head of, I'm not getting an advantage. If anything, still drafting those guys as my wide receiver 3, I'm already probably the 12th best team. So where do I make my advantage is because we have 2 flexes, because it's flex leagues, band kickers, add a flex. Nick Chubb, if he's even 100% by October, I'm going to destroy everybody else. Again, now I'm very risky. And then what did I do for the rest of the draft, Joe? You see that. Wide receiver. I took flyers like Shakir, Mike Williams, Joshua Palmer, Jahan Dawson, Troy Franklin, Adonai Mitchell. All potential 2s and 3s.
Right.
Probably a lot of busts in there. But on paper, if those running backs don't hit, I'm done. But this is what I say, Joe. Joe, did you get a belt for finishing in 5th, or did you get a belt for finishing in 1st?
I'm fine with that. So
trash my team.
Half PPR. Well, it's funny because I don't want to trash the beginning of their draft at all. Because I ran the board for this. I was the one putting the stickers on for this. So I was watching you and I was watching Jamie specifically because you guys tend to have similar thought processes.
We went exactly opposite direction, both of us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but the players Jamie took are my players. We have the same evaluation of players. I think the Lamb, Pacheco, Mixon start makes a lot of sense. Mixon, for me personally, is not the way I would have gone. That's where I would have said, I know Kamara's going to last. I know Stevenson's going to last. Like, there's other guys out there that I liked as RB2. Rashad White was another one because I took him. That's where I would have taken that wide receiver 3 because you still had Evans, DK Metcalf, DJ Moore, Michael Pittman, and even Cooper Kupp if you wanted to roll the dice. All those guys were still on the board instead of Mixon because, again, Mixon is still one of these guys, very hit and miss. And now he's in a new situation. And, yes, we can think it's all going to be great, but that doesn't make it great. After you did that, I thought T. Higgins was a great value. You and I both picked him. I love the Kamara pick because once you were in with the Mixon thing, it made a lot more sense to just go in on that. Then Lamar Jackson was a great value, I think, where you got him. Nick Chubb was the one that I did not understand when you did that. And the only reason is if he doesn't play till week 8 or week 9, the Cleveland Browns are the offensive ecosystem that I've crushed the most in the black book that I said, I don't know what this team's going to be, who the quarterback's going to be, what kind of consistency, where the targets are going. Joe Flacco's gone, so forget David Njoku because he's been in the league for 8 years and he wasn't good until Joe Flacco showed up. So why is it going to be good now?
Yeah, 100% on the show.
All of those situations, Chubb to me is where, again, when you then go, and I'm all for price enforcing, but price enforcing for a player coming back from a major knee injury at 29 on a team already offensively I don't like, Rashee Rice would have been the guy that I took there who went 2 picks later. Because Rashee Rice as your 3rd wide receiver there would have given you stability in the ecosystem of the Kansas City Chiefs, which let's not forget too. I believe his court date is December, right? December 9th right now.
And that's part of it too. It's like now we went from we expect possibly 6 games to he might not even be suspended.
It might not be next year.
Here's my thought on that real quick.
Where it's the year after. And if that's the case,
my concern is that Zeke. My concern was what happens if it's in the middle of the season or like even towards the end of the season. And I know that's rare that it's going to happen.
I think that's impossible. I think that's not even rare. I think it's downright impossible considering you don't see the NFL make moves until the legal moves kind of get done. So whether that gets dismissed, whether it gets whatever, then at least they can say, it was proven in the court of law, this or that, or whatever it was, right. Or they settled out of court or whatever the situation is. Whatever that ends up being, again, I think the NFL is going to pull a fast one on us again and just wait and push it off till next year. And that, I think, is the only spot where I would have inverted stuff. Everything you're saying about the upside of guys like Palmer, Franklin, I like Khalil Shakir. Mike Williams is always hurt, so that's not my guy. And then you put him on. You take Mike Williams.
But at that point, I'm just like,
I said this to you when you drafted him. I said, yeah, it's going to work out. You took the guy with the most lower leg injuries and put him on the hardest turf in the entire NFL. I'm sure that's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. But overall,
I'm only going to play him on the road, which will be for like 3 games.
What, do they open in week 1 on the road? I think they do. But that to me is where it went. You had those 3 banger running backs. You need a little bit more wide receiver depth, especially because this year, as you said, wide receiver, everybody's kind of just, that's where people are right now because that's where the scoring is. And it makes sense even in the half PPR. That's the only thing I would have done differently. Those 2 things were the Mixon pick for maybe one of the other ones. But once you did Mixon and Kamara, the Chubb one was an interesting luxury where I think Jake's brain is going, man, I love Nick Chubb. That's a great value. I got to get him instead of I really need a wide receiver 3 on a good team. That I think
yeah,
the difference.
I think I'll get a wide receiver 3 overall period out of all those picks. But I'm with you. Like I really believe Nick Chubb. Everything from the Browns have been telling us, and I know I'm with you. I don't love the offense, but at least I know they'll run. And I feel like everything they've done this offseason tells me they think he's going to be ready, if not week 1 by October. But I want you to get some time before we get out of here. Joe Pisapia, by the way, at Joe Pisapia 17 at Fantasy Pros. Tell everybody about RPV, your black book, everything. They can find you, what you got coming up, stuff like that.
Well, go get the black book over on Amazon. It's right there. It's been updated
Bestseller.
too, and the cheat sheets. That's right. And the cheat sheets get updated nowadays every couple weeks or so now, because we're in August. So if you get the cheat sheets too, they get emailed to you, which is great. So you get the latest RPV stuff, the ecosystem. Again, a way to look at teams, offenses, and how to invest in them in fantasy and even wagering too. It all kind of overlaps there. And look, it's myself, it's Derek Brown, it's Andrew Erickson, it's some of the best, Scott Bogman, right? It's a great group of people writing for the Black Book. So go support a great team. And thanks for having me, Jakey. It's fun to do the recap of the draft here with you. It's always fun to do the fallout. It's a good time.
It is. And hopefully you got some strategy advice and figure out Superflex if you want to give it a shot, or single quarterback, just players we're looking at. And we'll be back with Meanie as he gets back into town and stops enjoying the America side of things and heads back to dumb old Canada. Well, we love Canada and we love you guys all in fantasy. Tales of the ranks. We'll be back next episode. See you guys later. I don't know why I'm waving.